13 years ago, a 33-year-old waitress in Providence, Rhode Island, vanished after finishing her late shift, leaving her family devastated and searching. Police suspected a random abduction since her car disappeared alongside her. But with limited surveillance and no witnesses, the investigation eventually hit a dead end. Yet over the years, her mother never gave up, keeping Sofia's porch light burning every night as a symbol of hope, until forensic technology advanced. A fingerprint overlooked in 2012 suddenly revealed a shocking match, shaking the quiet Rhode Island town and changing the course of justice forever. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more true crime investigations. The neon lights of Mama Rosa's diner were still glowing when Sofia Perez untied her apron for the last time on November 12, 2012. Outside, Providence's Federal Hill District was draped in a cold November drizzle that made the asphalt shine like black glass under the streetlights. The familiar sounds of the city at midnight, distant sirens, the hum of late-night traffic, the occasional laugh from bar patrons heading home, filled the air as Sofia gathered her things. At 33, Sofia had the kind of warm smile that made regulars ask specifically for her table. She'd been working at Mama Rosa's for nearly 5 years, saving every tip with the fierce determination of a single mother who understood that dreams required sacrifice. Her coworkers knew her as the one who always stayed late to help close, who remembered every customer's usual order, and who never complained about pulling double shifts when life demanded it. She had this way about her, recalls Maria Santos, who worked the evening shift alongside Sofia. Even on the worst days when customers were difficult or the tips were terrible, Sofia would just smile and say, "Tomorrow's another chance." She believed that, she really believed tomorrow would be better. That Monday night had been typical, steady but not overwhelming. Sofia had served her regular customers, Mr. Antonelli, with his black coffee and apple pie, the late shift nurses from Rhode Island Hospital, grabbing takeout, the college students stretching their meal budgets with bottomless coffee refills. She'd clocked out at exactly 11:45 p.m., just as she had hundreds of times before. The parking lot behind Mama Rosa's was poorly lit, with only 2 functioning streetlights casting weak pools of yellow light across the cracked pavement. Sofia's silver Toyota Corolla sat in its usual spot, third space from the dumpster. Security cameras, there were none. This was 2012 in a quiet neighborhood, where the biggest crime was usually vandalism or the occasional break-in. I watched her walk to her car, remembers Tony Castellano, the night cook who always made sure female employees got to their vehicles safely. She waved goodbye, same as always. Her brake lights came on, and I went back inside to finish cleaning. That was the last time anyone saw Sofia alive. The drive from Mama Rosa's to Sofia's apartment on Carpenter Street should have taken exactly 10 minutes, a straight shot through the heart of Providence's Italian district, past the familiar landmarks of her daily life. She would have passed St. Bartholomew's Church, where she attended Sunday Mass, and Romano's Market, where she bought her morning coffee. These were streets she knew like a prayer. But Sofia never made it home. Her apartment remained dark, her key unused, her cat waiting by an empty food bowl. The silence that settled over 47 Carpenter Street that night would stretch for 13 long years, broken only by a mother's tears and the steady burn of hope that refused to die. By 11:55 p.m., Sofia should have been calling her sister Carmen, as she did every night after work. It was their ritual. A quick check-in, a shared laugh about the day's customers, plans for tomorrow. Carmen's phone never rang. In the growing quiet of a November night, something terrible had already begun. November 13th, 2012. The kitchen light in the Perez family home had been burning all night, casting a warm glow through the frost-covered window as Sofia's mother, Isabella, sat at the small wooden table where she'd waited for her daughter to call home safely. The silence felt heavier with each passing hour, pressing against her chest like a physical weight. By 6 a.m., Isabella's hands were shaking as she dialed Sofia's number for the 15th time. The calls went straight to voicemail, that cheerful recording of Sofia's voice now sounding like an echo from another world. "Hi, You've reached Sofia. Leave me a message, and I'll call you back as soon as I can. We knew something was wrong the moment she didn't call. Isabella would later whisper to investigators, her voice barely audible above the hum of the police station's fluorescent lights. Sofia never broke her promises. Never. If she said she'd call, she called. If she said she'd be home, she came home. Carmen arrived at her mother's house just after dawn, her face pale and drawn from a sleepless night. The sisters had planned to meet for breakfast before Carmen's nursing shift at the hospital. Instead, they found themselves calling every hospital emergency room in Providence County, their voices growing more strained with each, "No, we have no one by that name." By 9 a.m., the Perez family had contacted the Providence Police Department. Officer Michael Torres took the initial report, his pen moving steadily across the form as he documented the basic facts. Sofia Maria Perez, 33 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, 125 pounds, brown hair, brown eyes. Last seen leaving work at Mama Rosa's Diner, Federal Hill. Vehicle missing, 208 silver, Toyota Corolla, Rhode Island plates. In missing person cases, the first 24 hours are critical, Officer Torres explained to the family, though his tone suggested he was reciting protocol rather than offering real hope. We'll issue a bolo, be on the lookout for both Sofia and her vehicle. We'll check with her known associates, review her recent activities. But even as Torres spoke the words, something in his eyes suggested he understood what the family was beginning to grasp. This wasn't a case of someone needing space or time to think. Sofia's purse was missing. Her car was gone. Her cell phone had stopped pinging towers after 11:58 p.m. the previous night, the last signal coming from somewhere near Elmwood Avenue, just a few blocks from the diner. The first search began that afternoon. Neighbors who barely knew the Perez family joined the effort, spreading out across Federal Hill with photocopied flyers bearing Sofia's smiling face. Local business owners taped her picture to their windows. The story spread through Providence's tight-knit communities like ripples in still water. This is the kind of neighborhood where everyone looks out for everyone else, explained Father Martinez from St. Bartholomew's Church, where Sofia had been a parishioner since childhood. When one of our own goes missing, we all feel it. We all search. We all pray. But as Tuesday stretched into Wednesday and Wednesday into Thursday, the searches began to feel more desperate than hopeful. The November weather turned bitter, with icy rain that soaked through volunteers' jackets and made the posted flyers run with ink. Sofia's face, once clear and smiling, became a blur of black and white on telephone poles and storefront windows. Isabella established a vigil on her front porch, wrapped in Sofia's favorite blanket, watching every car that turned down Carpenter Street. Carmen took leave from the hospital to coordinate with police and manage the growing number of volunteers. The family's living room became a command center, with maps spread across the coffee table and Sofia's photograph propped on the mantelpiece, like a shrine. "We'll find her," Officer Torres promised during one of his daily check-ins, though his eyes betrayed the doubt that was settling over the investigation like winter frost. "We'll bring Sofia home." But that night, as Isabella lit the porch light that would burn for the next 13 years, a terrible certainty was beginning to take root in her heart. Sofia wasn't coming home on her own. Someone had taken her daughter, and somewhere in the darkness of Providence, a family's worst nightmare had only just begun. The Providence Police Department's Major Crimes Unit occupied the third floor of a gray concrete building that had seen better decades, its windows overlooking the city where Sofia Perez had vanished without a trace. Detective Raymond Silva, a 20-year veteran with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, spread Sofia's case file across his desk as the morning sun cast long shadows through the Venetian blinds. When someone disappears with their vehicle, you're usually looking at one of three scenarios, Silva explained to his partner, Detective Lisa Chen, as they reviewed the initial evidence. Voluntary disappearance, accident or abduction. Given what we know about Sofia's character and circumstances, voluntary disappearance seems highly unlikely. The investigation began with methodical precision. Sofia's cell phone records showed normal usage patterns right up until 11:58 p.m. on November 12th, the last ping coming from a tower near Elmwood Avenue, roughly 6 blocks from Mama Rosa's diner. After that, nothing. The phone had either been destroyed or had run out of battery in an area with no service. Search grids were established across Providence's west side, with K-9 units from the Rhode Island State Police joining local officers in combing through vacant lots, abandoned buildings, and the wooded areas near Roger Williams Park. The German shepherds picked up Sofia's scent in the diner's parking lot, her perfume mixed with the lingering smell of coffee and marinara sauce. But the trail ended abruptly at the spot where her car had been parked. The dogs followed her scent for maybe 30 feet, then lost it completely, explained Sergeant Mike O'Brien, who handled the K-9 units. That tells us she got in a vehicle, either her own or someone else's. After that, we're basically working blind. Helicopters from the Rhode Island National Guard swept the Blackstone River and Narragansett Bay, their searchlights cutting through the November darkness like silver blades. Divers checked retention ponds and the deeper sections of waterways, where a car might have gone undetected. Ground-penetrating radar units scanned areas where the terrain suggested possible burial sites. The volunteer search effort grew beyond anything Providence had seen in recent memory. More than 300 people showed up on the first Saturday, many of them strangers who had seen Sofia's story on local news. They formed human chains across Nudisville Park, checked drainage culverts under highway overpasses, and walked grid patterns through the industrial areas along the Woonasquatucket River. I never saw anything like it, recalls Jennifer Walsh, a local teacher who organized weekend search parties. Soccer moms with their kids in strollers, college students skipping classes, retired folks who could barely walk, they all came out. Sofia had touched something in this community, but as days stretched into weeks, the physical searches began yielding diminishing returns. No trace of Sofia's Toyota Corolla appeared despite bolo alerts throughout New England. No witnesses came forward despite extensive canvassing of the route between the diner and her apartment. No physical evidence emerged from the hundreds of locations searched by volunteers and professionals alike. Detective Silva found himself working 18-hour days, following leads that seemed promising before dissolving into dead ends. A silver car spotted near the Massachusetts border turned out to belong to a traveling salesman with a solid alibi. A woman matching Sofia's description seen at a Connecticut rest stop was actually a college student heading home for Thanksgiving break. We'll find her, Silva promised Isabella Perez during one of their weekly meetings, though the words were beginning to feel hollow, even to him. We're not giving up. We'll never give up. The technical aspects of the investigation revealed the limitations of 2012 technology. Surveillance cameras were sparse in the Federal Hill area, and those that existed often had poor resolution or limited coverage. DNA analysis was available, but required samples to compare against, and Sofia's case had produced precious little physical evidence. A partial fingerprint had been lifted from the diner's back door, but it was smudged and incomplete, insufficient for database matching with the technology available at the time. As November turned to December, and December to January, the searches became more sporadic. Volunteers returned to their regular lives, though many continued checking local news for updates. The helicopter flights were suspended. The K-9 units moved on to other cases. Sofia's disappearance settled into the grim routine of a cold case, regular file reviews, occasional tip follow-ups, and the growing certainty that time was working against them. But in the Perez family home on Carpenter Street, Isabella continued her vigil. Every night she turned on the porch light before settling into her chair by the front window. Every morning, she checked the street for any sign that her daughter might be coming home. The light became a beacon in the darkness, visible from blocks away, a mother's refusal to let hope die, even as the investigation grew cold around her. The basement of St. Bartholomew's Church had hosted countless community meetings over the decades, but none quite like the gathering on December 3rd. More than 200 Providence residents packed into the modest space beneath the sanctuary, their breath visible in the chilly air as they huddled together on folding chairs and stood along the walls, painted with children's handprint art from Vacation Bible School. Father Martinez opened with a prayer, his voice echoing off the low ceiling as he asked for Sofia's safe return and strength for her family. But what followed wasn't just a religious service, It was the mobilization of a community that had decided one of their own would not be forgotten. She was like family to all of us, the elderly priest said, gesturing toward the enlarged photograph of Sofia that someone had placed on an easel near the front of the room. Sofia served our community with grace and kindness for years. Now it's our turn to serve her. The meeting transformed into a coordination center for the most comprehensive grassroots search effort Providence had ever witnessed. Maria Santos, Sofia's co-worker from the diner, had spent her own money printing 5,000 flyers on bright yellow paper, a color that would become synonymous with Sofia's case throughout the city. Local business owners volunteered their copy machines, their window space, their time. We plastered those flyers everywhere, recalls Tony Russo, who owned a print shop on Atwells Avenue. Telephone poles, bulletin boards, shop windows, car windshields in parking lots. You couldn't drive through Federal Hill without seeing Sofia's face. We made sure of that. The community response revealed both the tight bonds of Providence's neighborhoods and the deep fear that Sofia's disappearance had awakened. If someone like Sofia, careful, responsible, beloved, could simply vanish, then no one was truly safe. That realization galvanized people in ways that surprised even longtime residents. Tips began flooding into the police department's dedicated hotline. Most were well-intentioned but unhelpful. Sightings of women who resembled Sofia at shopping malls in Massachusetts, gas stations in Connecticut, airport terminals in Boston. Each report required follow-up. Each lead demanded investigation, and Detective Silva's team found themselves chasing ghosts across New England. But some tips carried more weight. A mechanic named Danny Torino called to report that a man had come to his garage on November 13th, asking about removing bloodstains from car upholstery. Another caller reported seeing Sofia's silver Corolla parked behind an abandoned warehouse in Cranston at around 2 a.m. on November 13th, though by the time police arrived to investigate, the car was gone. Every tip felt like it might be the one. Detective Chen recalls, "You'd get that call, and for a moment, you'd think, this is it. This is how we find her," but 99% of them led nowhere. That 1% though, that kept us going. The search effort took on a life of its own, with volunteers organizing into specialized teams. Some focused on distributing flyers and managing the tip line. Others coordinated with local media to keep Sofia's story in the news. A group of Sofia's regular customers from the diner pooled their money to offer a $10,000 reward for information leading to her whereabouts. Rumors began circulating through the community like wildfire in dry grass. Some whispered about a jealous ex-boyfriend, though Sofia's family insisted she hadn't been dating anyone seriously. Others speculated about drug dealers who might have mistaken Sofia for someone else, a theory that gained traction when several heroin overdoses occurred in the Federal Hill area during late November. People needed explanations, explains Dr. Catherine Williams, a criminal psychologist who studied the case years later. When something this random and terrifying happens in a close community, people create theories to make sense of it. Some of those theories can actually hinder investigations by sending police down false paths. The most persistent rumor involved a customer who had been bothering Sofia at work, asking personal questions, lingering too long after his meals, making comments that made her uncomfortable. Several coworkers confirmed that such a person existed, though their descriptions varied significantly. Police spent weeks trying to identify this individual, interviewing dozens of regular customers before concluding that the creepy customer was likely a composite of several different people whose behavior had been misremembered or exaggerated through retelling. Local television stations picked up Sofia's story, running segments during their evening newscasts that showed her photograph alongside footage of search volunteers combing through Roger Williams Park. The Providence Journal ran a front-page article titled "The Waitress Who Vanished," detailing Sofia's life and the community's response to her disappearance. But as December gave way to January, maintaining community momentum became increasingly difficult. The initial surge of volunteers dwindled to a dedicated core of perhaps 30 people who continued organizing weekend searches. The tip line, once overwhelmed with calls, began receiving only a few reports per week. Media coverage became sporadic, then stopped altogether as other stories claimed public attention. Isabella Perez watched this gradual fade with a mixture of understanding and heartbreak. She knew people had their own lives to live, their own families to protect, but each time another volunteer stopped coming to the searches, each time Sofia's story slipped further from the headlines, it felt like her daughter was disappearing all over again. The porch light continued burning through it all, a steady beacon that neighbors began using as a landmark when giving directions. Children walking to school would point to the house with the light that's always on. Delivery drivers learned to look for it when finding addresses on Carpenter Street after dark. Without realizing it, Isabella's simple act of hope had become woven into the fabric of the neighborhood's daily life. Detective Silva's office had taken on the appearance of a war room by January 2013, with Sofia's case files stacked in neat piles across every available surface. Crime scene photographs, interview transcripts, evidence logs and timeline charts covered the walls like wallpaper, creating a visual maze that reflected the investigative labyrinth he'd been navigating for 2 months, without finding a way out. The case had presented challenges from the very beginning, but as winter settled over Providence, those challenges were hardening into seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Modern police work relied heavily on digital breadcrumbs, cell phone GPS data, credit card transactions, ATM camera footage, social media activity, but Sofia had left virtually no electronic trail after 11:58 p.m. on November. Back in 2012, our technology was good, but it wasn't what we have today, Silva explained to Assistant District Attorney Patricia Henley during a case review meeting that felt more like a post-mortem. We could track her phone to that last tower ping, but then nothing. Her credit cards were never used after that night. No ATM withdrawals. It was like she just evaporated. The forensic evidence was equally frustrating in its limitations. The partial fingerprint lifted from the diner's back door had been too damaged by weather and handling to yield a conclusive match through the FBI's automated fingerprint identification system. Hair and fiber samples collected from Sofia's apartment and the diner had provided baseline comparisons, but no foreign material that might indicate a struggle or the presence of an unknown person. DNA technology in 2012 could work miracles with clear samples, but Sofia's case had produced precious little biological evidence to analyze. Swabs taken from the diner's parking lot, where her car had been parked, showed traces of motor oil, rainwater, and the expected DNA from employees who regularly used the area, but nothing that stood out as suspicious or foreign. Every road leads nowhere, Silva muttered to Detective Chen as they reviewed witness statements for what felt like the 100th time. The interviews had been thorough and professional, but they painted a picture of Sofia as someone without enemies, without the kind of complicated relationships that often led to violence. Her ex-boyfriend, Marcus Rodriguez, had been cleared within the first week of investigation. He'd been working a double shift at a warehouse in Warwick on November 12, with time cards and security footage confirming his whereabouts. Moreover, Sofia's family and friends uniformly described their breakup as amicable, two people who'd grown apart but retained mutual respect. Co-workers at Mama Rosa's had been interviewed extensively, their backgrounds checked, their alibis verified. Tony Castellano, the cook who'd watched Sofia walk to her car, had remained at the diner until 1:30 a.m. cleaning and prep work for the next day, corroborated by the restaurant's owner and security system that tracked employee keycard usage. The mysterious customer who'd allegedly been bothering Sofia proved to be a chimera, a composite of several different men whose separate interactions had been conflated in witnesses' memories. When police finally tracked down the individuals in question, each had solid explanations for their presence at the diner and alibis for the night of Sofia's disappearance. What seemed like our best lead turned out to be a dead end built on misremembering and community anxiety, Chen recalls. People wanted to help so badly that they sometimes convinced themselves they remembered details that weren't actually there. The physical searches, despite their scope and community support, had yielded nothing of value. Hundreds of volunteer hours had been spent combing through areas where Sofia might have been taken, but Providence's urban landscape offered countless places where someone could dispose of evidence or conceal a crime. Abandoned buildings, construction sites, industrial areas along the river, dense woods in Roger Williams Park. Each location searched raised the possibility that they were looking in the wrong place entirely. Vehicle searches proved equally fruitless. Despite BOLO alerts throughout New England and beyond, Sofia's silver Toyota Corolla had simply vanished as completely as Sofia herself. Police checked impound lots, scrap yards, and used car dealers. They coordinated with departments in neighboring states, expanded the search to include New York and Pennsylvania. The car might as well have been swallowed by the earth. Technology that would later prove crucial was still in its infancy. Advanced cellular tower analysis could narrow down location data, but not with the precision that would become available in later years. Social media investigation was limited to basic Facebook and email account reviews, missing the complex web of digital communication that would later become standard in missing person cases. We were doing good police work with the tools we had, Silva reflects years later. But some cases need more than good police work. They need luck, or time, or technology that doesn't exist yet. Sofia's case needed all three. The psychological toll on investigators was becoming apparent. Silva had worked hundreds of cases during his career, but Sofia's disappearance had gotten under his skin in ways that surprised him. Perhaps it was Isabella's nightly vigil, visible from the street every time he drove through the neighborhood. Perhaps it was the community's investment in finding answers, or perhaps it was simply the complete absence of leads in a case that should have produced anything to work with. Press conferences became exercises in frustration, with reporters asking variations of the same question. Do you have any new leads? Silva found himself offering variations of the same non-answer. We're following up on all available information and ask anyone with knowledge of Sofia's whereabouts to contact our tip line. By spring of 2013, the case was transferred to the Cold Case Unit, a small department within Providence PD that handled investigations where active leads had been exhausted. It wasn't an admission of defeat, exactly, but it was an acknowledgement that Sofia's disappearance had moved beyond the realm of active investigation and into the limbo of unsolved mysteries. The porch light on Carpenter Street continued burning, casting its small circle of brightness into the darkness that had swallowed Sofia Perez. Isabella's vigil had become as much a part of the neighborhood as the streetlights and stop signs, a constant reminder that some questions remained unanswered, some wounds remained unhealed, and some hopes refused to die despite every reason they should. Spring arrived in Providence with the kind of cruel beauty that makes loss feel sharper, as if the world's renewal only emphasized what had been permanently taken away. The porch light at 47 Carpenter Street continued its nightly vigil, now burning against a backdrop of budding trees and neighbors' gardens coming back to life. A stark reminder that, while the world moved forward, the Perez family remained frozen in November. Isabella had developed rituals around her grief, small ceremonies of hope that structured her days and gave meaning to her vigil. Every morning at 6 a.m. she would make 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for Sofia, placing the second cup on the kitchen windowsill, where it would sit untouched until evening. She would check the porch light to ensure the bulb was working, replacing it immediately if it had burned out during the night. "I'll keep the light on until she walks through that door," Isabella would tell anyone who asked about the steady glow that had become a landmark in the neighborhood. The phrase became her mantra, repeated so often that neighbors began saying it along with her, a community prayer for the impossible. The bureaucracy of loss had proven almost as difficult to navigate as the grief itself. Sofia's apartment lease had expired, forcing Isabella to pack her daughter's belongings into boxes that now filled the basement of the Carpenter Street house. Each item, Sofia's favorite sweater, her collection of coffee mugs from different restaurants, the nursing school textbooks she'd been studying when she disappeared, was wrapped carefully and stored with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. Carmen had taken extended leave from her nursing job to help manage the practical aspects of having a missing family member. Banks required death certificates to close accounts, but death certificates required bodies. Insurance companies demanded proof of death for claims, but no such proof existed. Sofia existed in a legal limbo that created endless paperwork and bureaucratic loops that felt designed to torture families already suffering unimaginable pain. The system isn't built for people who just disappear. Carmen explained to a social worker who was trying to help them navigate victim assistance programs. Everything assumes you either have a living person or a dead body. We had neither, and that meant we had nothing. Birthdays became exercises in complicated grief. Sofia's 34th birthday in March 2013 found Isabella baking her daughter's favorite cake, chocolate, with vanilla frosting, and setting a place for her at the dinner table. The cake went uneaten, eventually thrown away when it began to mold, but the ritual continued each year like clockwork. Christmas was even worse. Sofia had always been the one to organize family gatherings, to coordinate gift exchanges, to decorate their modest tree with ornaments collected over decades of shared holidays. Her empty chair at Christmas dinner 2012 had been surrounded by wrapped presents that would never be opened, cards that would never be read, memories of laughter that now felt like echoes from another lifetime. The financial strain was constant and grinding. Isabella worked part-time as a house cleaner, but her income barely covered basic expenses even before Sofia's disappearance had created new costs. Printing flyers, maintaining the tip line, traveling to follow up on potential sightings, the search for Sofia was expensive in ways the family had never anticipated. We maxed out credit cards, borrowed against the house, sold everything we could sell, Carmen recalls. People don't realize that searching for someone costs money. Every lead you follow means time off work, gas money, sometimes hotel bills, if the lead is far away. We went broke looking for Sofia. Community support had been overwhelming initially, but as months stretched into years, that support naturally diminished as people returned to their own lives and concerns. The weekly vigils at St. Bartholomew's Church dwindled from hundreds of attendees to dozens, then to a core group of perhaps 15 people who continued gathering every Sunday to pray for Sofia's return. Local media attention followed a similar pattern. The Providence Journal had run follow-up articles on the 6-month and 1-year anniversaries of Sofia's disappearance, but as other stories claimed headlines, Sofia's case faded from public consciousness, except among those who knew her personally. The cold case unit at Providence PD reviewed Sofia's file every few months, but with no new leads or evidence to pursue, these reviews had become routine rather than hopeful. Detective Silva, now retired, would sometimes drive past the Carpenter Street house on his way home from his security job, noting that the porch light was still burning and feeling the familiar weight of the case that had never been solved. Isabella's health began to suffer under the strain of constant vigil and unresolved grief. She developed insomnia, finding it impossible to sleep deeply when Sofia might be out there somewhere, needing help. Her doctor prescribed medications for anxiety and depression, but Isabella was reluctant to take them, afraid that any dulling of her awareness might somehow interfere with her ability to sense if Sofia was trying to come home. She became a ghost herself, a neighbor observed years later, always watching, always waiting, never fully present in the world the rest of us were living in. The porch light kept burning, but you could see the light going out of Isabella's eyes a little more each year. Yet even as the investigation went cold, even as media attention faded, even as community support diminished to a dedicated few, Isabella's faith in Sofia's eventual return never wavered. She continued setting out 2 coffee cups each morning, continued checking the porch light each evening, continued believing that somewhere in the darkness, her daughter was fighting to come home. The light burned on through seasons and years, through storms that knocked out power to the entire neighborhood and heat waves that made the bulb almost too hot to replace. It became a beacon not just of hope, but of the kind of love that refuses to surrender to probability, or logic, or the well-meaning advice of friends who suggested it might be time to let go. On Carpenter Street, letting go was not an option. The light would burn until Sofia walked through the door, no matter how long that might take. Providence learned to live with Sofia's absence, the way a person learns to live with a chronic injury, aware of it always, accommodated to it gradually, but never quite accustomed to the dull ache that flares up at unexpected moments. By 2015, 3 years after her disappearance, Sofia Perez had become part of the city's mythology, a story new residents heard from neighbors, a cautionary tale that parents shared with teenage daughters, a mystery that defined Federal Hill as much as its Italian restaurants and religious festivals. The neighborhood around Mama Rosa's diner had changed in subtle but noticeable ways since November 2012. Women walked faster after dark, keys already in hand before leaving restaurants or shops. Parents picked up their children from school rather than letting them walk home alone, even in broad daylight. The casual trust that had characterized the close-knit community had been replaced by a heightened awareness that terrible things could happen to good people without warning or reason. "You never feel safe again," explained Patricia Morelli, a local teacher who had lived on Federal Hill for 30 years. "Not completely safe, anyway. Before Sofia, you'd think, that kind of thing doesn't happen here. After Sofia, you realized it could happen anywhere, to anyone." New residents moving into the area would inevitably ask about the house on Carpenter Street, where a light burned constantly in the front window. Longtime neighbors had developed a practiced way of telling Sofia's story, matter-of-factly, but respectfully, acknowledging both the tragedy and the family's ongoing hope. The porch light had become a landmark, referenced in directions and real estate listings. "Third house past the one with the light that's always on." Local businesses maintained small shrines to Sofia's memory in ways both touching and heartbreaking. Mama Rosa's diner kept her employee photo on the wall behind the cash register, with fresh flowers placed beneath it each week. Romano's Market, where Sofia had bought her morning coffee, continued donating proceeds from their coffee sales on the 12th of each month to a fund that helped cover costs for other families dealing with missing persons cases. The annual vigil at St. Bartholomew's Church had evolved into a broader community event focused on missing persons awareness, but Sofia remained its central figure. Father Martinez would begin each November gathering by lighting a candle for Sofia specifically, then opening the floor for families dealing with similar tragedies. The basement that had once hosted 200 searchers now accommodated perhaps 50 people, but their commitment ran deeper than numbers suggested. Children who had been in elementary school when Sofia disappeared were now in high school, and her story had become part of their understanding of their neighborhood's history. Some had never known Federal Hill without the awareness of Sofia's absence, making her disappearance seem as natural and permanent as the street names or the location of the fire station. "My daughter grew up seeing that porch light every night," recalls Jennifer Walsh, whose family lived 2 streets over from the Perez house. "When she turned 16 and got her driver's license, she told me, 'I'll always call when I get somewhere safe, because of Sofia.'" The story became a lesson about staying connected, about letting people know you're okay. The economic impact of Sofia's disappearance was subtle but measurable. Property values in the immediate area had declined slightly, particularly for single-family homes where women lived alone. The neighborhood's reputation for safety, once a selling point for families and young professionals, had been replaced by an association with unsolved mystery and potential danger. Local businesses adapted to the new reality in practical ways. More restaurants and shops installed security cameras and improved lighting in their parking areas. Some establishments began offering employee escort services to vehicles after closing. The changes were incremental and often unspoken, but they reflected a community that had learned to take precautions it had never before considered necessary. Cold case investigators from other jurisdictions would sometimes visit Providence to study Sofia's file, hoping to find patterns or techniques that might help with their own unsolved disappearances. The case had become something of a touchstone in law enforcement circles, an example of a thorough initial investigation that had nonetheless failed to produce answers, illustrating the limitations of traditional police work when faced with crimes that left no witnesses and minimal evidence. Media coverage had evolved from news reporting to true crime content, with Sofia's story appearing in podcasts and online forums dedicated to unsolved mysteries. Internet sleuths would occasionally descend on Federal Hill with theories and metal detectors, most of them well-meaning but ultimately ineffective. Isabella had learned to politely but firmly discourage amateur investigators, preferring to maintain her faith in official channels while protecting her family's privacy. The broader Providence community had processed Sofia's disappearance in ways that reflected both the city's tight-knit character and its pragmatic understanding that urban life carried certain risks. Social media groups, dedicated to local safety, would reference Sofia's case when discussing late-night precautions or suspicious activity. Her story had become woven into the fabric of community conversation about personal security and mutual protection. Detective Chen, who had stayed with the Providence PD and occasionally reviewed cold cases, would drive through Federal Hill every few months to check on leads or follow up on tips that still trickled in sporadically. The porch light on Carpenter Street served as a constant reminder of the case that had consumed so much of her early career, the investigation that had taught her both the importance of methodical police work and its ultimate limitations. Some cases stay with you forever, Chen reflects. Sofia's case taught me that doing everything right doesn't guarantee results. Sometimes the evidence just isn't there. The witnesses don't exist. The technology isn't advanced enough. But that doesn't mean you stop caring, or stop hoping that someday something will break loose. By 2019, 7 years after Sofia's disappearance, the porch light had become as much a part of Federal Hill's landscape as the church bells or the aroma of garlic and basil drifting from restaurant kitchens. Children had grown up assuming it was simply a decorative choice, while adults understood it as a monument to love and determination that refused to accept the finality of loss. The light continued burning, steady and bright, casting its small circle of illumination into the darkness that had swallowed Sofia Perez, waiting for technology and time to finally reveal what November 2012 had hidden so completely. The Rhode Island State Crime Laboratory occupied a modern facility in Cranston that bore little resemblance to the cramped, outdated forensics department that had first processed Sofia Perez's case by January 2024. Advances in technology had transformed nearly every aspect of criminal investigation, and Detective Lisa Chen, now heading the cold case unit, had made it a priority to systematically review older cases with newly available tools. Forensic analyst Dr. Maria Santos, no relation to Sofia's coworker, had been working with the automated fingerprint identification system's latest software upgrade when she decided to reprocess some of the partial prints that had been considered too damaged for analysis in previous years. The system's enhanced algorithms could now extract usable data from fingerprints that earlier technology had deemed hopeless. The partial print from Sofia's case had been lifted from the back door of Mama Rosa's diner, collected during the initial investigation, but filed away as insufficient for database comparison. Under the laboratory's bright LED lighting, Santos loaded the digital image into the upgraded AFIS system, watching as the software began mapping ridge patterns and minutia points that had been invisible to earlier analysis methods. "We ran it again, and this time it hit," Dr. Santos announced to Detective Chen during their weekly case review meeting, her voice carrying the kind of controlled excitement that forensic professionals develop when breakthrough discoveries become routine, but still meaningful. The system found 17 points of comparison with a print in the database. That's more than enough for a positive identification. The fingerprint belonged to Robert Bobby Castellano, a 47-year-old mechanic who had been living in Providence since. His prints were in the system due to a 2018 arrest for domestic violence, a charge that had been dropped when his ex-girlfriend declined to testify, but not before his biological data had been entered into state and federal databases. Detective Chen felt her pulse quicken as she reviewed Castellano's file on her computer screen. The man had no prior connection to Sofia's case, despite living and working in Providence during. He operated a small automotive repair shop called Bobby's Garage on Westminster Street, just 8 blocks from Mama Rosa's diner. More significantly, his business specialized in collision repair and automotive restoration work that would require knowledge of how to dismantle vehicles and dispose of parts. "This changes everything," Chen told Lieutenant Rodriguez, as they prepared to brief the Providence Police Department's leadership on the development. "We've got physical evidence placing this guy at the scene, and he has the technical knowledge to make a car disappear completely." The investigation moved quickly, but carefully. Within 48 hours, surveillance teams were monitoring Castellano's garage and residence, documenting his daily routines while building probable cause for search warrants. Detectives discreetly interviewed his neighbors, customers, and acquaintances, painting a picture of a man who lived alone, kept to himself, and had a reputation for being helpful to women with car trouble. Perhaps too helpful. Carmen DeLuca, who lived 3 blocks from the garage, recalled that Castellano had approached her in 2019 when she was having trouble starting her car in a grocery store parking lot. He was very friendly, very knowledgeable about cars, she told investigators, but something about the way he looked at me made me uncomfortable. He kept asking personal questions, where I lived, whether I lived alone, what my schedule was like. I thanked him for the help, but got away as quickly as I could. Dr. Santos worked to extract additional evidence from materials that had been preserved from Sofia's case. Advanced DNA analysis could now detect genetic material from increasingly smaller and degraded samples, and she began reprocessing clothing fibers and hair samples that had yielded nothing 12 years earlier. The breakthrough came when she analyzed a coffee cup that had been collected from the diner's dumpster during the original investigation, one of dozens of items that had been preserved in evidence storage, despite seeming unlikely to produce useful information. Using techniques that hadn't existed in 2012, Dr. Santos was able to extract a partial DNA profile from saliva residue on the cup's rim. The profile was incomplete, only enough markers to suggest a match rather than confirm one definitively, but when compared to a sample surreptitiously obtained from Castellano's discarded cigarette butt, the results were compelling enough to support the fingerprint evidence. Modern forensic science isn't just about having better equipment, explains Dr. Patricia Williams, who directs the State Crime Laboratory. It's about having systems that can find patterns and connections that human investigators might miss. The fingerprint that was useless in 2012 became the key to solving the case in 2024, not because the evidence changed, but because our ability to read that evidence evolved. Detective Chen coordinated with the district attorney's office to ensure that search warrants would be comprehensive enough to cover Castellano's home, business, and any vehicles or property he controlled. The legal team was particularly interested in any evidence related to vehicle disposal or modification, given the complete disappearance of Sofia's Toyota Corolla. As the investigation gained momentum, Chen found herself thinking about Isabella Perez and the porch light that had been burning for more than 11 years. The family had endured more than a decade of uncertainty and false hopes, and Chen was determined not to raise their expectations until the evidence was overwhelming and charges were filed. But late at night, driving home from the police station through Federal Hill, Chen would sometimes slow down when passing Carpenter Street to look at that steady light burning in the front window. Soon she hoped she would be able to knock on that door with news that might finally allow a mother to turn off the light and find peace. The breakthrough that had eluded investigators for 12 years had finally arrived, hidden in plain sight within evidence that had been waiting patiently for technology to catch up with determination. Sofia's voice, silent for so long, was about to speak through the scientific analysis of a partial fingerprint and trace amounts of DNA, demanding justice from the man who had thought he could disappear into the crowd of an ordinary life. The Providence Police Department's briefing room had been transformed into a command center by February 2024, with whiteboards covered in timeline charts, suspect photos, and evidence markers that connected 12 years of scattered information into a coherent narrative of murder and deception. Detective Chen stood before the assembled investigative team, a mix of current officers and retired personnel who had worked Sofia's case, presenting evidence that would finally answer questions that had haunted the community for over a decade. Robert Anthony Castellano, Chen announced, pointing to a recent surveillance photograph pinned to the central board. 47 years old, mechanic, owner of Bobby's Garage on Westminster Street. His fingerprint was found on the back door of Mama Rosa's diner, and preliminary DNA analysis suggests a match to biological material recovered from the scene. The man in the photograph looked utterly ordinary, medium height and build, graying hair, the kind of unremarkable appearance that helped him blend into any crowd. He wore mechanic's coveralls in most of the surveillance photos, his hands perpetually stained with grease and motor oil, his expression neutral and professional as he went about his daily business of fixing cars and interacting with customers. It was someone we all knew. Detective Silva, now serving as a consultant to the cold case unit, remarked with a bitter recognition of an investigator who had spent years looking for a monster hiding in plain sight. Castellano had been operating his garage 8 blocks from the diner since he would have been familiar with the area, familiar with the late-night routines of local businesses. The investigation into Castellano's background revealed a carefully constructed life that appeared normal on the surface, but showed disturbing patterns upon closer examination. He had moved to Providence from Hartford, Connecticut in 2008, claiming to be seeking a fresh start after a divorce. Public records showed no marriage or divorce proceedings, however, and attempts to verify his previous addresses and employment history revealed significant gaps and inconsistencies. "He's what we call a ghost," explained Detective Rodriguez, who specialized in background investigations. "He exists in the system just enough to rent apartments and obtain business licenses, but there's no real depth to his documented history. That's often a red flag for someone who's deliberately trying to obscure their past." Surveillance of Castellano's garage had revealed behavioral patterns that seemed designed to provide him with access to potential victims. He offered free roadside assistance to women whose cars broke down, often arriving at scenes before official tow trucks. He advertised discounted repair services, specifically targeting single women and college students. Several female customers interviewed by police described feeling uncomfortable with his personal questions and attempts to learn details about their daily routine. "He had a system," Chen explains. "He would position himself as helpful and trustworthy, someone you could call if you were in trouble with your car. But he was really gathering intelligence, learning who lived alone, who worked late shifts, who might be vulnerable." The technical aspects of the case began falling into place, with the kind of clarity that comes when the right suspect is finally identified. Castellano's garage specialized in collision repair and automotive restoration, work that required sophisticated knowledge of how to dismantle vehicles completely. His customer records showed that he frequently purchased damaged cars from insurance companies, stripped them for parts, then sold the remaining metal as scrap. If you wanted to make a car disappear completely, Bobby Castellano would know exactly how to do it, explained automotive forensics expert Dr. James Mitchell, who had been brought in to consult on the case. "Cut it into sections, separate the different types of metal, distribute the pieces to multiple scrap yards over time. Within a few weeks, a Toyota Corolla becomes completely untraceable." Search warrants executed at Castellano's garage, and residents revealed a workshop equipped with industrial cutting tools, hydraulic lifts, and metal processing equipment that went far beyond what a typical repair shop required. Investigators also discovered a collection of newspaper clippings about Sofia's disappearance, along with articles about other missing women cases from throughout New England. The most damning evidence came from fiber analysis of materials found in Castellano's garage. Dr. Santos had preserved fabric samples from Sofia's work uniform and personal clothing, and advanced microscopic analysis revealed matching fibers embedded in the concrete floor of the garage's work bay. The fibers had been painted over multiple times, suggesting Castellano had been aware they were there and had attempted to conceal them. "Those fibers tell a story," Dr. Santos explained to the investigative team. "They show that Sofia, or at least her clothing, spent time in that garage. Given that she had no legitimate reason to be there, and given the other evidence we've collected, it strongly suggests that she was brought there against her will." DNA analysis had progressed beyond the initial partial match from the coffee cup. Investigators had obtained court authorization to collect a comprehensive DNA sample from Castellano during a staged traffic stop, and the results provided conclusive evidence that his biological material was present at multiple locations connected to Sofia's disappearance. As the evidence mounted, Detective Chen began coordinating with the district attorney's office to prepare arrest warrants and plan the takedown operation. Castellano appeared to be following his normal routines, showing no signs that he was aware of the investigation closing in around him. The surveillance teams reported that he continued working on customer vehicles, maintaining his facade of helpful mechanic and trusted community member. "The hardest part about cases like this," reflects retired Detective Silva, "is realizing that the person you're looking for was probably right there all along, hiding behind a normal life and a friendly smile." Castellano had been fixing cars and helping customers for years, while Sofia's family suffered and the community lived in fear. That kind of deception leaves scars that go beyond the original crime. The breakthrough had been building for months, but the final pieces were falling into place with startling speed. Modern forensic science had finally caught up with evidence that had been waiting 12 years to tell its story, and soon Robert Castellano would be forced to answer for what he had done to Sofia Perez on a rainy November night. The porch light on Carpenter Street continued burning, unaware that its long vigil was finally nearing its end. The morning of March 15, 2024 broke gray and cold over Providence, with the kind of persistent drizzle that made the city's streets shine like black glass. Weather that eerily echoed the night Sofia Perez had vanished, 11.5 years earlier. At 6 a.m. as Robert Castellano was arriving to open Bobby's garage for what he believed would be another routine day of automotive repair, a carefully coordinated law enforcement operation was moving into position around his modest single-story home on Pocasset Avenue. Detective Chen had spent weeks planning the arrest, coordinating with SWAT teams, forensic specialists, and prosecutors to ensure that every aspect of the operation would be legally sound and tactically safe. Castellano had given no indication that he was armed or dangerous, but his ability to conceal his true nature for over a decade suggested a level of calculation that made law enforcement cautious about underestimating him. "We go in fast and clean," Chen briefed the assembled officers at 5:30 a.m. in the parking lot of a CVS pharmacy 3 blocks from Castellano's house. "He's maintained this normal life for 12 years, which means he's disciplined and careful. We don't give him time to think or react." The arrest unfolded with the swift efficiency of a well-rehearsed operation. Castellano was walking from his aging Ford pickup truck toward his front door, keys in hand and a cup of coffee from Cumberland Farms steaming in the morning air, when tactical officers emerged from concealment positions and surrounded him with weapons drawn. "Robert Castellano, you're under arrest for the murder of Sofia Perez," Detective Rodriguez announced, as officers placed handcuffs on the stunned mechanic. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Neighbors began emerging from their houses as the commotion registered, many still in bathrobes and slippers, shocked to see their quiet streets suddenly filled with police cars and tactical officers. Castellano had lived on Pocasset Avenue for 8 years, maintaining the kind of low-profile existence that made him nearly invisible to the people around him. "He fixed my car last year. I can't believe it," whispered Maria Rodriguez, no relation to the detective, who lived 2 houses down from Castellano and had watched him be placed in the back of a patrol car. "He was always so helpful, so polite. I would never have imagined." Never. The search of Castellano's property began immediately following his arrest, with forensic teams documenting every room, every tool, every piece of potential evidence that might connect him to Sofia's murder or reveal information about the disposal of her body and vehicle. The garage behind his house had been converted into a workshop that contained industrial-grade equipment, more suited to a demolition company than personal automotive work. News of the arrest spread through Federal Hill with a speed that only shocking revelations can achieve in tight-knit communities. Within hours, crowds had gathered outside Bobby's garage, where police had cordoned off the entire building as a crime scene. Local television news trucks began arriving by mid-morning, their satellite dishes and camera crews creating a media circus around what had been a quiet neighborhood business just hours earlier. Isabella Perez learned about the arrest from Detective Chen, who drove to Carpenter Street to deliver the news in person rather than risk the family hearing it first from media reports. The detective found Isabella in her usual position by the front window, the porch light still burning despite the daylight hours, having never been turned off for over 11 years. "Mrs. Perez, we've made an arrest in Sofia's case," Chen said gently, settling into the chair across from Isabella in the small living room that had become a shrine to Sofia's memory. "We have strong evidence against a local mechanic named Robert Castellano. We believe he's the person responsible for taking Sofia from us." Isabella sat in stunned silence for several minutes, her hands trembling as she processed information she had waited more than a decade to hear. When she finally spoke, Her voice was barely audible. "Are you certain? After all these years, are you certain it's him?" The forensic investigation of Castellano's garage revealed evidence that painted a horrific picture of what had happened to Sofia on November 12. Advanced luminol testing detected blood evidence that had been carefully cleaned but not completely eliminated from the concrete floor. Microscopic analysis revealed additional fiber evidence linking Sofia's clothing to the garage environment. Most damning were the automotive records discovered in Castellano's office, showing that he had purchased a 2008 Toyota Corolla from an insurance salvage yard just 3 weeks after Sofia's disappearance. The vehicle identification number didn't match Sofia's car, but the timing and model were too coincidental to ignore, suggesting he had acquired a replacement vehicle to practice dismantling techniques or to dispose of evidence. The level of planning and preparation we're seeing suggests this wasn't a crime of opportunity, District Attorney Patricia Henley explained during a press conference that afternoon. The evidence indicates deliberate predation and sophisticated efforts to conceal the crime and dispose of evidence. Community reaction ranged from shock to anger to a complicated sense of relief that the mystery had finally been solved. Castellano had been a familiar figure in Federal Hill for over a decade, someone who had attended community events, donated to local charities, and maintained the kind of helpful neighborly demeanor that made him trusted by residents who had no idea they were interacting with a killer. "It makes you question everything," reflected Father Martinez during an interview outside St. Bartholomew's Church. "This man was part of our community. People trusted him with their cars, their safety, their well-being. To learn that he was capable of such evil, it shakes your faith in your ability to judge people's character." The investigation revealed that Castellano had likely been surveilling Sofia's routines for weeks or months before attacking her, learning her work schedule and identifying the isolated parking lot behind Mama Rosa's diner as the perfect location for an abduction. His mechanical expertise had allowed him to disable her vehicle's electrical system, leaving her stranded and vulnerable when she attempted to drive home. DNA evidence collected during the garage search provided the final pieces of biological proof connecting Castellano to Sofia's murder. Advanced analysis techniques had detected his genetic material on items of Sofia's clothing that had been preserved as evidence, confirming that direct physical contact had occurred between victim and perpetrator. As evening approached on March 15, 2024, Isabella Perez stood on her front porch, looking at the light that had burned for the first time since November 13, 2012, she reached up and switched it off, plunging the front of her house into darkness that somehow felt less frightening than the uncertainty that had ruled her life for over a decade. The arrest of Robert Castellano had finally provided answers to questions that had tormented a family and haunted a community, but those answers came with the bitter recognition that evil had been hiding in plain sight, wearing the mask of helpfulness and community citizenship, while secretly feeding on the trust of those around him. The Providence County Superior Court had seen countless criminal trials over its decades of operation, but few had generated the intense community interest that surrounded the People versus Robert Anthony Castellano in the fall. Every seat in the gallery was filled each day with Sofia's family, community members, local officials, and journalists covering what had become Rhode Island's most closely watched murder trial in years. Prosecutor Maria Santos, the same woman who had worked alongside Sofia at Mama Rosa's diner 12 years earlier and had since earned her law degree, delivered opening statements that connected the technical evidence to the human tragedy at the case's heart. Standing before the jury in the same courtroom where she had once served as a witness in other trials, Santos spoke with the authority of someone who had known Sofia personally and understood the full scope of what had been lost. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a predator who hid behind a mask of helpfulness and community service while planning and executing the murder of an innocent woman," Santos began, her voice carrying the controlled emotion of someone seeking justice for a friend. "The evidence will show that Robert Castellano used his position as a trusted mechanic to target Sofia Perez, that he carefully planned her abduction, and that he used his technical expertise to make both Sofia and her vehicle disappear completely." The prosecution's case unfolded, with the methodical precision that 12 years of technological advancement had made possible. Maria Santos, from the State Crime Laboratory, walked the jury through the fingerprint analysis that had broken the case open, using enlarged photographs and computer graphics to demonstrate how modern AFIS technology had identified patterns that were invisible to earlier systems. "Science doesn't lie," Dr. Santos testified, pointing to side-by-side comparisons of Castellano's known fingerprints and the partial print recovered from Mama Rosa's diner. 17 points of comparison create a statistical probability that approaches mathematical certainty. Robert Castellano touched that door handle, placing him at the scene where Sofia Perez was last seen alive. DNA evidence provided even more compelling testimony, with forensic experts explaining how trace amounts of biological material had been preserved and analyzed using techniques that didn't exist in hair samples. Skin cells and saliva traces created a biological signature that connected Castellano to Sofia's clothing and personal effects with overwhelming scientific certainty. The automotive forensic evidence painted the most disturbing picture of premeditation and disposal. James Mitchell testified about the sophisticated equipment found in Castellano's garage, explaining to the jury how vehicles could be systematically dismantled and their components distributed through scrap metal networks in ways that made reconstruction impossible. Mr. Castellano possessed both the technical knowledge and the industrial equipment necessary to completely eliminate a motor vehicle, Mitchell explained. The metal cutting tools, hydraulic systems, and processing equipment found in his garage could reduce a Toyota Corolla to unidentifiable scrap metal within a matter of hours. Defense attorney Patricia Crawley faced the nearly impossible task of creating reasonable doubt in the face of overwhelming physical evidence. Her strategy focused on challenging the chain of custody for evidence that had been stored for over a decade, questioning whether contamination or degradation might have compromised the forensic analysis. "My client is an innocent man whose fingerprint ended up on a door handle through completely innocent contact," Crawley argued during her opening statement. Castellano was a respected member of this community for over a decade, someone who helped his neighbors and contributed to local charities. The prosecution is asking you to believe that this helpful, law-abiding citizen was secretly a cold-blooded killer based on scientific evidence that is 12 years old and potentially compromised. But the prosecution's case proved too comprehensive for defense challenges to undermine. Witness testimony from Sofia's co-workers, family members, and community members painted a picture of a woman with no enemies and no reason to disappear voluntarily. The medical examiner testified that while Sofia's body had never been recovered, the evidence strongly suggested homicide rather than accidental death or suicide. Perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Isabella Perez herself, who took the witness stand wearing a simple black dress and carrying a photograph of Sofia that she clutched throughout her testimony. Speaking in a voice that was quiet but steady, she described the 11 years of waiting, hoping and maintaining faith that justice would eventually arrive. "I kept the light on every night, because I believed Sofia would come home," Isabella testified, tears streaming down her face as she looked directly at Castellano, who sat impassively at the defense table. "I know now that she never could come home, because this man took her from us. But keeping that light burning was my way of fighting back against the darkness he brought into our lives." The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all charges: first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence. As Judge Patricia Morrison read the verdict aloud, Castellano showed no emotion, staring straight ahead with the same neutral expression he had maintained throughout the trial. "Mr. Castellano, you have been found guilty of the murder of Sofia Perez, a crime that has haunted this community for over 12 years. Judge Morrison stated during the sentencing phase, "Your actions not only ended an innocent life, but caused immeasurable suffering to Sofia's family and friends. Justice, though delayed, is now delivered. I sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole." The courtroom erupted in applause as the sentence was announced, with Sofia's family embracing and community members openly weeping with relief and vindication. Isabella Perez stood and faced Castellano directly for the first time during the trial, speaking words that were barely audible, but carried the weight of over a decade of grief. Sofia can rest now. We all can rest now. Outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps where Sofia's supporters had gathered for a final vigil. Father Martinez led a prayer of thanksgiving and remembrance, while community members shared memories of Sofia and reflected on the long journey toward justice that had finally reached its conclusion. This community never gave up on Sofia, Detective Chen told reporters gathered on the courthouse steps. From the family who kept searching, to the neighbors who kept hoping, to the scientists who kept improving their techniques, everyone played a role in bringing Robert Castellano to justice. Sofia's voice was finally heard, and it spoke clearly. Justice delayed is not justice denied. That evening, as Isabella Perez sat in her living room surrounded by family and friends, she looked toward the front window, where the porch light had burned for the first time since November 2012. The light remained off, replaced by the warm glow of interior lighting and the peaceful darkness of a family finally able to rest. The trial had ended, justice had been served, but the healing would continue for years to come, as the Providence community learned to live with answers instead of questions, with closure instead of uncertainty, with the knowledge that evil had been identified and contained rather than allowed to roam free among them. The Perez case stands as both tragedy and triumph, a stark reminder of how evil can hide behind familiar faces, while simultaneously demonstrating the power of persistence, technological advancement, and a community's refusal to forget. Sofia's life was stolen by someone she trusted, her future erased in a moment of calculated violence by a man who had perfected the art of appearing helpful while harboring deadly intentions. For over 11 years, her family lived in the shadows of uncertainty, yet they never abandoned hope, never stopped believing that truth would eventually emerge from the darkness that had swallowed their daughter. This story reminds us of several profound truths about both human nature and criminal justice. First, predators often succeed by exploiting our basic inclination to trust those who present themselves as helpful and community-minded. Robert Castellano's ability to maintain his facade for over a decade illustrates how dangerous individuals can weaponize social trust, using positions of perceived helpfulness to gain access to potential victims while avoiding suspicion from law enforcement and neighbors. The case also demonstrates the evolving power of forensic science and its crucial role in achieving justice, even when traditional investigative methods reach their limits. Evidence that seemed useless in 2012 became the key to conviction in 2024, not because the physical materials changed, but because our ability to read and interpret those materials evolved dramatically. This technological progression offers hope for other cold cases and families still waiting for answers. Perhaps most importantly, Sofia's story showcases the resilience of those who seek justice and refuse to let time diminish their determination. Isabella's nightly vigil with the porch light became more than a symbol of hope. It became an act of resistance against the forces that seek to make victims disappear from memory and concern. That steady light served as a beacon not just for Sofia's potential return, but for a community's commitment to never forgetting those who have been taken from them. The healing process for Providence's Federal Hill community will continue for years to come, but the resolution of Sofia's case has restored faith in both the justice system and the power of collective memory. Children who grew up seeing that porch light now understand that persistence can overcome even the most carefully concealed crimes. Families dealing with similar tragedies have proof that cold cases can be solved, that new technologies can breathe life into old evidence, and that justice, though delayed, is never fully out of reach. Sofia Perez's memory endures not just in the hearts of her loved ones, but as a reminder that truth has its own timeline, operating independent of human impatience or despair. Her voice, silent for so many years, finally spoke through microscopic ridge patterns and trace amounts of DNA, demanding accountability and achieving the justice that had been deferred but never denied. The light that burned for 4,223 nights has been turned off, but the illumination it provided, hope in the face of uncertainty, love in the presence of loss, determination in the shadow of evil continues to shine as brightly as ever.